Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sisters with Ventures, where we amplify BIPOC women in investing. And I am so excited today to have you introduce and meet and learn all about Dr. Nakeema Stefflbauer. She is abroad, and this is you're our first guest that is across the pond. And we're excited. So I met with a few colleagues just about what's going on in the EU. Like, what's the scene looking like? And I do not want to be that ignorant American that only knows what I know from my limited perspective here, because racial equity is a fight everywhere. Everywhere there's marginalized people, there is something to advocate for. And I'm so excited to have your expertise and what you will bring to us today. So why don't we just kick this off? You are a powerhouse. We don't have time to read your entire resume because it's so legit and it's so hype and it's so Ivy and it's so all the things. But you are amazing, and you are a tech guru, and you are a woman of STEM, and you are an advocate. And why don't you tell us like your origin story?
My origin story. Let's see. Basically, I got started in tech in the first wave of the tech boom, and I'm a New York native, so I was in New York City at the time. I started working for an e-learning company, and kind of with the boom and the bust and the boom and the various waves, I stuck with it. I worked in fintech, I worked in ERP, enterprise resource planning, I worked in a consultancy, and eventually I realized, this was it. This was where I wanted to be as the mobile era began and everything started to move to mobile development. And then I realized this was bigger than just the US. The whole world was undergoing this digital revolution. So I started checking out different opportunities in Europe, and Berlin I'd always been interested in and been curious about. They had a really small tech scene at the start of the tech boom. But by 2013, they had a thriving tech sector. So I started to visit and check out whether there were jobs available, and they needed project managers, project leaders. And eventually I made the move in 2013.
So, let's talk about who your people are from, because I feel like that will help us understand who you are and where you come from and why you advocate for what you advocate for. So what's your ancestral story?
So my people are from the Caribbean. My mom's Jamaican, my dad's from Panama. I grew up in a very West Indian neighborhood in Brooklyn. I always had a very close connection to both communities. And I feel like that is part of the reason that as an immigrant in Germany, that has been my interest and that has been my focus since I got here. And the nonprofit that I founded seven and a half years ago, Frauenloop, which means Women's Loop in German and English, is focused on getting German nationals and immigrants and asylum seekers from all over the world together, women specifically, to learn about programming and the tech sector so they can improve their professional perspectives and they can empower themselves in a world that's rapidly becoming all about tech.
And so what differences or similarity even do you see between women here in the tech industry and in there?
Women in the tech industry are facing the same struggles, I'm sorry to say. I feel like women, in particular women of color, but women everywhere who are getting into a very male-dominated field where the salaries are much higher, the benefits are much higher and better than in many industries. You have a lot of the same kinds of challenges in Germany and in Berlin specifically that you have in the US and you read about in the US, where there's a lot of emphasis on imposter syndrome, and I feel like sometimes you get encouraged to identify with, this imposter syndrome when, maybe you're just working in a really challenging set of circumstances with not very supportive teams. And maybe that's what is happening more often than imposter syndrome and, doubting your abilities, because most of the women I know are badasses. They can do anything. They can learn anything. And the women that I'm working with in my nonprofit, they are learning how to reinvent themselves as tech programmers. So, these are women coming from all different industries who become web developers, who become data analysts, data scientists, test automation engineers. This is not for the faint of heart.
Right. When they're executing.
And they're succeeding. And this is the point of the program, and this is what I use as the barometer for success. For me, it's about how many women can we successfully get empowered so that they can enter the field and they can stay in the field. Because it's not over once you get the job and you have your foot in the door. It's about staying in power.
We have to retain you. So tell us how you got into angel investing.
I got into angel investing after becoming really curious about how many startups were getting stupid funding that were not necessarily innovative. And that's a specific feature of a lot of the startups that you'll find in Europe. A lot of the ideas that are profitable and that have been scaled very successfully in North America sort of end up in Europe because there's still a mentality that, if it worked there, it should work here. And, there's no need to really innovate insofar as you're just copying a model that's already been proven in the States. So I was looking at that and I was thinking, who's funding this? How is this happening? What's behind this? And that got me interested in the venture sector, which has its own, obviously, long history in the US that's focused on the early days, the Netscape folks, the Andreessen Horowitz, and, the growth from Sand Hill Road. But in Europe, it's much more diffuse because you have the powerhouse tech hubs of London and different cities that have had a long, profitable tech sector. And then you have different entities that have slowly started to build funds, and it's been much, much smaller scale than what you have in the US. And so I was nominated for a fellowship that was a year-long program focused on Europe. It was called Included VC, intended to diversify the backgrounds and the experiences of people working in the venture space. And after that, I realized, the fastest way to get into the action was to invest myself. And I had been investing in the stock market in the US. I had been managing my own portfolio for quite some time. So it was a pretty easy shift to start making bets on startups that I vetted, that I sourced, that I was interviewing, that I was then positioning myself to be in a position to support and to advise. And that's kind of how I started angel investing.
Now, one uniqueness between US and EU is that you don't have to be an accredited investor to invest in the EU.
No, you do not.
Here is removed. So can you talk about that? Because this is cause a lot of anxiety for people here in the States, that there is this barrier of what wealth can provide to you. And can you talk about how does it work there?
It's very different. That's true. The accredited investor hurdle is a bigger one in the US because it's very specific financial targets that you have to be able to demonstrate in order to participate. Here, while it's also daunting for people, because I feel like especially women, there's not a lot of information. It's very hard to understand how angel investing or the venture sector in general differs from stock market investing or any other risk category. And because there's so little guidance, it's another interesting fact is that any investment in a startup is classified, you become automatically classified as a sophisticated investor. So it's basically automatically. It's you are
Wow.
signing, the paperwork, and you are investing your funds with the understanding that you may make profit, you may lose your funds. And that's the level of risk you have to be comfortable with. And this understanding is that if you are investing, you are already that demonstrates that you are a sophisticated investor.
I I love that. I mean, so even though this kind of hurdle barrier is removed, you're saying you still have difficulties because women aren't exposed to this as a way.
I feel like
Or
you still have difficulties because there's also a very different culture with regards to investing for retirement. You're talking about European countries where generally there is still a functioning pension system, and generally there's a lot of interest in encouraging residents of the country to pay into that pension system and not encouraging them to open private retirement accounts. And so when most people are not encouraged or, incentivized to start getting familiar with the stock market, with funds, with bonds, with any of those instruments, this is a completely new venture. And it's actually very similar to the way that you do get the retail investment options in Germany, at least, where the vast majority of these private retirement funds that you can invest in have a minimum of at least 10,000 euro. So there's no, 20 miles per hour startup and get comfortable. It's like either you are investing or you're not investing. And this is the reason when I talk to women who are interested in angel investing and they're asking, should they start with venture as the first asset class they invest in? I'm always telling them, no. Please get familiar with diversifying your risk and, learn how to get comfortable with the vicissitudes of the market, the ups and the downs that are going to affect the bottom line before you jump into a high risk category like startups.
Right. And can you talk about impact investing? Like, what's your investment thesis?
My investment thesis has narrowed from general digitalization, software in underserved, under-digitalized industries, to now being pretty much focused on software that accelerates the pace of productivity using machine learning or AI technologies. So, for instance, I invest in a couple of companies that are doing either natural language processing or computer vision or process automation generally in the clinical research, pharma sector, in the banking and insurance sector, all of these areas where, generative AI, as we know it outside of banking and insurance, is for making funny pictures and creating funky versions of Eminem's voice. But you can also use it, for example, in areas such as synthetic data. And synthetic data is really interesting and useful in sectors where you have data scarcity and you want to understand and profile your users more specifically. You don't have enough data about women, you don't have enough data about a specific demographic, and that can allow you to create those data sources without jeopardizing people's personally identifiable information. So I'm really interested in areas like that. That's what my thesis has kind of focused in on, is AI for accelerating impact, not in defense or, surveillance type uses, which I feel very strongly about.
And how do you get smart about that? I mean, I feel like AI is like this thing, this wave.
It's a big hype machine. How do you get smart about it? Well, it's helpful that I had this terrible experience way back when the Coded Bias film came out. Actually, I think beforehand, when the gender shade study came out that Joy Buolamwini and Timnit Gebru and Deb Raji were working on, I was talking with a bank, and the bank was trying to give me a pre-approved line of credit, and I was all for it because it was tax time. And they were like, "You need to send us a selfie in addition to your scan." This is a legit bank, and they were international bank too. And they were saying, you need to send us your scan of your driver license and a couple of other things, fill out a form, and then please send us a selfie. I was like, that's different. And so I sent them the selfie, and they were like, okay, 3 days, and we'll send you back the approval because you're pre-approved. There's nothing to check. And 3 days later, no one had called. I called them. I got sent to the fraud department. Fraud department is like, we're not really sure why you're here, but maybe you should resubmit your application. Fast forward like 30 days, I'd resubmitted my application like 3 times. Every time I get sent to the fraud department people are like, we're not sure why you're here. I'm like, I'm not sure why I'm here. And then I'm realizing, okay, this is clearly to do with this selfie. And are you sure it's not to do with my photograph and my brown face? And they don't know, and they're not able to tell me. And I'm thinking, okay, so you're using this new software and you don't know how it works, and there's no mitigation, and there's nobody to talk to. Okay, this is really interesting. I wonder if there are other uses for AI technologies that end up excluding people and rejecting people in this way. And that led me to ask more of these questions in industry, of the data scientists who I know work in the area of bias reduction, data privacy. And I started to realize, even before this Coded Bias documentary came out, this is a huge problem. This is a problem that is typically not understood or studied until Black or brown women and people who are outside of the typical Silicon Valley stereotype of an engineer are identifying and calling out these problems. And so I started to get much more interested in tracking the areas where these kinds of problems were coming up. And there were many. And this was an example that I ended up speaking at the European Parliament about. Which led to more conversations with developers, with companies, with HR and recruitment people, and other non-specialists who are all relying on AI-driven recruitment tools and different kinds of platforms without really understanding how things can malfunction or work poorly or not work at all for different segments of the population.
Right. Wow. I love that. That's like just a way to like make it personal, like your personal story. You're like, this is bull. I know the problem is.
Once I figured out that the problem had to be something to do with the software not being able to read my skin tone, I thought to myself, okay, so this is a problem that probably affects unknown percentage of this bank's customers, and they have rolled this out without giving any tools to mitigate these problems. This is a lot like the facial tracking tools that these, proctoring applications offer that had so many difficulties during the pandemic because they didn't do such a good job of registering dark-skinned students either. They didn't do such a good job of, working with neurodivergent students who didn't make the same amount of eye contact with the camera. I mean, all of these things that are just within the range of normal human behavior, but if they're not accounted for, and more importantly, if there's no mitigation, this is the kind of AI that nobody wants to see, right?
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for us to really get smart and become an activist. And one way being an activist is being an angel investor, like powering these movements to get what you want.
I ask a lot of questions. I'm really curious about what people are building and why they're building it. And I'm interested in how, I'm a big sci-fi fan from way back. I want to propel us all to the future. I do not want to simply talk about how we're going to make millions and then we're going to pull a WeWork and be out of here. It's about what is the big picture for society or for, whatever segment of customers you're interested in supporting. And that's been really great. That's the cool part about angel investing, talking with founders, getting to see what their vision is and how far they've gotten with funding, without funding, if they're bootstrapping. because there's a lot of people, especially people of color, who are incredibly ingenious and have done a lot with very little in the EU. And I'm really proud that that's a big feature of my portfolio as well, that it's exclusively software companies, and all but one are women of color, Black men and women, and everybody's somewhere else. Everybody's doing something else. Some of them are in Sweden, some of them are in Italy, some of them are in the UK, and everyone is pushing their industry and innovation forward in ways that I love to amplify, because we don't hear enough about these founders.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. That's why we're here. So can you talk about, I'm always curious about Black American women who leave the country for whatever reason. How has your experience been as a Black woman in Europe, a Black American woman in Europe? What is it like? Has it been joyous? Has it been fresh air? Has it been, I'm just always curious.
So I don't want to answer that question with a blanket answer for everybody, because everybody's experience is very different. And I have to, give that caveat, because I want to leave room for other people to have other experiences than mine has been. But the thing that I always say when Americans, Black Americans in particular, ask me, how is it to live in Germany and be in Germany, is I say that it's really, really cool to be an American, because moving to Germany allowed me to be an American first and foremost.
Yeah.
And that's not how it works in the States.
Well, no, not at all. You're Black first.
Yeah. Yep. So that's definitely something that I think is true for a lot of Black Americans who moved to Berlin. Berlin specifically, because that's a little special. It's kind of out there. It's always been sort of left of center and very different than the rest of Germany, and it prides itself on that.
Yeah.
But this is also true for the Black people I know who are Dutch, who are French, who've also landed in Berlin, and they say the same thing. I get to be French in Germany. I get to be Dutch in Germany. It's the same in their home countries. In their home countries, they're Black first. So there's an interesting thing happening with this, cosmopolitan mixture in a lot of these big global cities.
Yeah. I always feel when I travel abroad, I get really patriotic, right? Because people know I'm American. When I travel abroad, by the way I talk, by my manners, like, and then I feel prideful all of a sudden, like, yes, I am American, but like, I never had that feeling in America.
Did you know that a lot of the harassment, I was reading a thread online recently, and there was an exchange that went on for quite a while where some people were saying that everybody knows that if you're being harassed in France, specifically in Paris, while Black, you just put on an American accent and they leave you alone. And that is a known and a tried and true technique to stop people from tracking and tracing and harassing you. And I was like, seriously though? Seriously? And it's known, and people understand. They just have to put on a hard American accent and speak that kind of American French, and everyone will think, oh, okay, they're not from here, so we don't have to.
It's like the privilege I always wanted of being American that I don't get while living here. But whenever I travel, it's like, oh my God. Like it's like I'm royalty or something. It's really weird, right?
Well, you also get the proximity to how incredibly powerful Black culture is everywhere. The music, the arts, so much of, now with TikTok and all of these kind of social media networks that are viral everywhere in the world, you don't know who is watching these threads and paying attention to these dances, and there is a lot of identification I think people have in unexpected places. There's a whole lot of influence that comes just with watching television shows, pop culture memes and movies and music from Black American artists. it's hugely influential, and you never
Yeah.
really see that, I think, in the States. I feel like in the States it's like, oh, maybe I've seen people in Japan going crazy for like Beyonce, but that's it. It's way more than
Yeah.
that. It's way more than that, and it's a lot
Yeah.
longer than just the time that Beyonce's been around.
Yeah. And I, and I feel it when I travel. I mean, I was in Stockholm, and I remember I listened to all hip hop playlists. Like, I didn't even hear any Swedish. I didn't know what Swedish music is. Because all I heard was hip hop everywhere I went.
Yeah.
And, but I also feel just in the diaspora, kind of elevation that Black Americans have across kind of the African diaspora. And so I also want to amplify all the other voices that we don't get to hear or don't get as much play. That's why I'm loving Afro beats. I'm like, hey,
listen, I have a really good friend here who I asked an honest question to, and I said, do they, she's Nigerian, and I said, do Nigerians listen to, American pop or rap or, different kinds of music when they have Afro beats? And she was like, not really. That's maybe one or two kind of exceptions, but mostly it's Afrobeats all the time, and that's okay. Like, they're okay with just Afrobeats. And I have to tell you now that I got on the bandwagon. I'm the same. I'm like, why would you not listen to Afrobeats? It's amazing.
Well, it's definitely like a serious fusion happen. I mean, my playlist is, a lot of Afro beats, some people will say there's no Afro beats without hip hop. Some people say there's no this without Fela. I mean, there's a debate. We go back and forth, but the cultures are intertwined and we are all here together, and it's amazing. Like, I love it.
Yeah.
So our time always.
Absolutely. I listen to it all, so I'm the same.
Yes, I love it. I love it. So let's wind this down a bit. It's been really fun. Tell me what you would tell little Nakeema.
I would probably tell her that the whole world is waiting for you, that you have no indication from Brooklyn, New York, what kinds of welcome are out there and what kinds of community can be built just by showing a willingness to learn, listen, observe how other people are living. Because that's actually been my experience. That's been my experience all over North Africa, much of the Middle East. A lot of the time that I spent doing research on black market trade back in the day, in those countries, I was always overwhelmed by the quality of the welcome that I received as a black woman on my own. We're talking about Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco. I would never have been able to imagine that kind of reception, and that is part of the reason why I've been so confident in moving to Germany, because I know that there are communities everywhere in the world that are welcoming and that are appreciative of Black people.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Sisters with Ventures. If so, download and subscribe to the Alive Podcast Network, available on both iOS and Android, and select Sisters with Ventures to support this podcast each and every week.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to the show. Please subscribe, tell a friend, check us out, let the world know. You can find out more information about this podcast at LeishaBell.com. And remember, be an angel, invest.